Bali will soon be washed off the face of the earth. The island will be destroyed by a major earthquake. Only crazy people invest here. The risk of tsunami in Indonesia does exist. The areas most exposed to possible flooding are well known. It's Kuta, Seminyak, Canggu, Sanur, that as a kind of punishment for uncontrolled development. Hi everyone, this is Anton. Every year I hear the same things. Bali will soon be washed off the face of the earth. The island will be destroyed by a major earthquake. The volcanoes will wake up and all real estate will disappear. And in general, only crazy people invest here. Today, let's calmly and rationally break down what really possess risks for property and residence in Bali, and what is just horror stories spread by trash bloggers and people who have never actually lived in Bali. No panic, no illusions, only facts. Let's go! And of course, we should start with the biggest fear: earthquakes. Here I need to make a short disclaimer. Unlike many so-called experts on the internet, I actually have a professional background related to how the Earth's crust works and what processes occur inside our planet. I graduated from the Gubkin Russian State University of Oil and Gas Faculty of Geology and Geophysics. My degree is in exploration geophysics. After university, I worked for 3 years at one of the largest oil companies where I was involved in building geological models of oil fields. I'm not a seismologist, of course, but my fundamental training allows me to reasonably assess the processes we are talking about today and to separate real risks from internet scare stories. So let's start with what is an undeniable fact. Indonesia is indeed located within the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, a zone with the highest concentration of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The reason is simple. Several tectonic plates converge here, and when they move, energy is periodically released, which we experience as earthquakes. But the most important thing to understand is this situation is not new. It has always been this way. It's happening now and it will continue in the future. For example, in 2025 alone, according to the Indonesian geological authorities, about 43,000 earthquakes were recorded across the country and nearby offshore areas. That is more than 100 seismic events per day. But there is an important nuance. The vast majority of these events are so weak that people do not feel them at all. Only around 40 earthquakes had a magnitude above 6, the level at which in theory damage to buildings can occur. Even those events did not lead to any serious destruction. And there were no earthquakes with a magnitude above 8 in the region that year, because such events are extremely rare in principle. If we look at the global statistics from the United States Geological Survey, which has been collecting data for more than 100 years, the picture becomes even clearer. Around 500,000 earthquakes occur worldwide every year, but on average only one of them exceeds magnitude 8. Now specifically for Bali. In 2025, about 500 earthquakes were recorded in the vicinity of the island, and only around 10 of them were noticeable to people, usually as light shaking or a brief feeling of dizziness. All these numbers lead to one simple conclusion. Earthquakes in Bali are not some sudden new threat that appeared yesterday. They are a natural background of this region, with which the island has lived for hundreds and thousands of years. And if we look at longer historical perspective over the past 126 years, with a radius of roughly 500 kilometers from Bali, only 23 earthquakes with a magnitude above 6.5 have occurred. Of those, only 5 exceeded magnitude 7, and only one event reached a magnitude above 8, the earthquake near Sumba Island in 1977. So I made very simple math calculations, and if we very roughly extrapolate the statistics, the probability of an earthquake with a magnitude above 8 occurring near Bali within next 30 years is about 19%. And of course, at this point you might say, Anton, you yourself are saying that strong earthquakes are possible, and that doesn't sound very reassuring. Yes, but now we come to the most important part. Earthquakes in Indonesia are not a new phenomenon, and over decades of experience, building regulations have long been adapted to local conditions. So engineers clearly understand what needs to be done so that a building can survive even very strong shaking. For example, Indonesian building standards SNI are based on potential tectonic earthquakes with magnitudes of around 7.5 to 8, with design peak ground acceleration of roughly 0.30 or 0.40 G for most areas of Bali. It is exactly these laws that are used to design columns, beams, reinforcement, foundation, and the entire load-bearing structure. Of course, we all understand that not every developer strictly follows these standards, because compliance increases construction cost and reduces project margins. But if a developer approaches construction professionally, conducts proper geological surveys, analyzes soil conditions, and correctly designs foundation and structural loads, such a building is capable of withstanding even very strong earthquakes up to magnitude 9. And events of this scale have occurred only 5 times worldwide in the entire history of instrumental observations. So, the key problem is not the fact that earthquakes occur here. The real issue is how a specific building is designed and constructed. The good news is that in recent years, the number of developers who build responsibly and do not cut corners on safety has grown significantly. Many of them do not simply follow local standards but set even higher requirements. As a result, new villas built by such companies can safely withstand even strong earthquakes. Now let's talk about volcanic eruptions. I often hear from some experts that only a madman would buy property on an island located near active volcanoes. The claim that once a volcano becomes active, it will simply destroy everything on its path and wipe out the island. Okay, let's look at this from a scientific perspective rather than from fear-based narrative. Bali does indeed have 2 active volcanoes, Batur and Agung. The more dangerous one is Agung. Let's imagine that an eruption begins. The first thing that happens during volcanic activation is a series of underground tremors caused by magma movement in the Earth's crust. In addition, increased degazing is observed, the release of volcanic gases accompanied by underground noise and vibration. These processes usually generate earthquakes with magnitude no higher than about 4. At this level, even relatively fragile buildings remain intact. Not to mention modern structures designed for seismic lows of 7.5 and 8. So talking about serious damage caused specifically by these tremors make no sense. For scale, during periods of activity, Agung can produce up to 1,000 small seismic events per day. However, their magnitude is so low that most of people do not feel them at all. Next comes the actual eruption and the formation of so-called pyroclastic flows mixtures of hot gas, ash and rock fragment. As a rule, their run-out distance does not exceed 10 to 12 kilometers. And it's important to understand that they do not spread evenly in all directions. They follow topography, moving along valleys and slopes. These directions are well studied and mapped. That's exactly why exclusion zones exist around volcanoes, where construction and permanent residence are prohibited. And all major tourist areas are located far outside these hazardous zones. For example, Ubud is more than 30 kilometers from Agung and Canggu is almost 90 kilometers away. Therefore, pyroclastic flows, lava flows or lahars physically cannot reach these areas. What can affect a larger part of the island is volcanic ash. Carried by wind, it can travel tens or even hundreds of kilometers. For instance, during past eruptions, ashfall has caused temporary airport closure. However, for buildings, ashfall doesn't mean destruction. It is mainly an operational issue. Roofs must be cleaned, windows washed, and ventilation and filtration system maintained. It is inconvenient, but it does not lead to building collapse. So the conclusion is simple. Yes, there are active volcanoes in Bali, but even in the event of an eruption, serious damage to buildings in tourist areas is extremely unlikely. And talk about the death of the island is much closer to scare stories than to real risks. Now let's discuss another popular fear. Tsunamis. Here is important to be honest. The risk of tsunami in Indonesia does exist. The country is located in technically active zone and underwater earthquakes are indeed one of the main cause of tsunamis. But what does this mean specifically for Bali? First, a strong tsunami does not follow every earthquake. Several conditions must be met at the same time. The earthquake must be very powerful, its epicenter must be under the ocean, and the fault movement must cause a significant vertical displacement of the seafloor. Most earthquakes simply do not meet these conditions. Second, Bali is not located directly opposite the most dangerous subduction zones. Unlike, for example, the western coast of Sumatra, where the devastating tsunami occurred in 2004. The island's geographic position and the location of major seismic sources make the tsunami risk here significantly lower than in many other parts of Indonesia. In addition, Bali's coastline is very diverse in terms of relief. A significant part of the coast consists of cliffs, elevated areas, or terrain located well above sea level. In such places, a tsunami wave physically cannot penetrate far inland. There are official inundation maps used by emergency services, local authorities, and hotels when developing evacuation plans. The areas most exposed to possible flooding are well known. It's Kuta, Seminyak, Canggu, Sanur, part of Denpasar, coast areas of Jimbaran. The reason is simple. There are low-lying coastal plains. Another important point is that Indonesia now operates a tsunami early warning system. So even in the case of a serious threat, people have time to leave coastal areas and move to higher ground. In practical terms, the main tsunami risk is temporary flooding of low-lying coastal zones and damage to beach infrastructure, boats, and seaside restaurants. This scenario in which the entire island is washed away belongs more to disaster movies and sensationalist narratives promoted by pseudo-experts and conspiracy theorists. So, a tsunami is a real but local risk for certain coastal zones, not a threat to destroy all real estate on the island. You might say, Anton, but you yourself show the map and say that there is a still risk in tourist areas. That's true. However, a very large portion of real estate in Bali is located in areas that are completely safe from tsunamis. For example, the entire Bukit Peninsula, Uluwatu, Pikatu, and upper parts of Nusa Dua. This is a limestone plate located at elevation of roughly 50 to 150 meters, which a tsunami wave physically cannot reach. Of course, the elevated areas of Ubud and central Bali. The probability that a wave could reach this location is practically zero. In general, any property located higher than approximately 20-30 meters above sea level lies outside the tsunami risk zone. And here is another good piece of news. Almost the entire first line of beachfront land in Bali is already developed. So finding a new project directly on the ocean front today is extremely difficult. There are only a few such opportunities, and due to their high value, such properties are usually additionally insured against natural hazards. So in majority of cases, the property you purchase will either be located well above sea level or outside dangerous coastal zones. The conclusion is simple. If you want to completely eliminate tsunami-related risk, choose projects that meet these criteria. If you still buy a property near the ocean, simply arrange proper insurance, and then even a tsunami is no longer a financial threat. Finally, let's talk about another concern that is actively discussed in the media and expert channels: abnormal rainfall in Bali, allegedly causing serious damage to buildings. And indeed, in September last year, Bali experienced extremely heavy rains that lead to flooding, landslides, and unfortunately even loss of life. Some people describe that as a kind of punishment for uncontrolled development and the destruction of traditional irrigation systems that had managed water for centuries. And there is a rational element in this argument. But let's look at the situation scientifically. It is no longer a secret that the average global temperature are rising due to climate change. This is a well-established scientific fact, and of course, Bali is not an exception. According to data from the MeteoBlue platform, the average annual temperature on the island has increased by about 1 degree Celsius over the past 46 years. And this trend is clearly visible in temperature records since the mid of 1970s. At first glance, 1 degree may not seem significant, but with every 1 degree increase in temperature, the atmosphere can hold approximately 7% more water vapor. As a result, rainfall becomes more intense, especially in tropical regions. Bali is not unique in this aspect. The same processes are happening worldwide. For example, during the same period when Bali experienced heavy rains, even more severe flooding occurred in India and Pakistan. In the Indian state of Punjab, rainfall levels exceeded the previous record set in 1988. In other words, today's so-called abnormal rainfall is becoming a new climatic reality that many countries must adopt too. At the same time, impact of heavy rains in Bali is indeed aggravated by urban development that has replaced traditional irrigation channels, as well as by drainage systems that often cannot cope with such volumes of water. The situation is further worsened by growing amount of waste generated by increasing numbers of residents and tourists. However, this is not some kind of mystical curse. It is a fully explainable and largely manageable situation. Local authorities are already cleaning drainage system and improving water management so that water can be discharged more efficiently in the future. In addition, areas with the highest flood risk are well known and mapped. This information should definitely be taken into account when selecting a property. And the good news, even during heavy rain, modern, well-designed buildings perform normally if proper drainage, site grading, and stormwater system are implemented in advance and effectively divert water away from the building. So, the main risk in Bali is not the rain itself. It is poor design and the absence of proper drainage. So, high-quality projects handle even extreme rainfall without serious issues. Dear friends, we have reviewed all the main natural risks in Bali from a scientific perspective. And the conclusion is simple. Do not trust sensational headlines and fear-driving narratives from so-called experts. Risks in Bali, just like anywhere else in the world, do exist. But when you looked at the subject more deeply, it becomes clear that they are far less dramatic than they are usually presented, especially when real estate is designed and built properly with local conditions. That's all from me for today. Thank you for viewing this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Here we are talking about investment without illusions. And if you have any questions or you want to choose proper location with proper property without any natural risk, please message me in Telegram or WhatsApp. I will answer all your questions and give you free consultation.